Okay, we'll go ahead and start. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the Board of Environmental Safety's Operating Plan Workshop. I am Sheena Brooks, the board's administrative liaison and board clerk, and I will be assisting and facilitating today's workshop. I would like to introduce our staff that are joining us and thank each of them for their assistance in setting up today's workshop. We have Greg Forrest, the BES attorney, Jessica Swan, our ombudsperson, and we have OEIM staff, Helio Rodriguez, Jenny Sanchez, and David Ryan, in addition to CSUS staff, Corinne Chopin and Ori Kalman. Next slide, please. Here is our agenda for today. We will have the operating plan presentation by member Sushma Bhatia for about 30 minutes. And then following that, we will open the rest of the workshop for public comment for another 30 minutes. And we are scheduled to end at 6 o'clock. Before we start, I would like to go over some logistical items for today. We ask that everyone select their preferred language options so that you will be able to fully participate in today's meeting. And to do so, everyone needs to select the interpretation icon on your Zoom toolbar. And if we can go to the next slide, please. This image shows where you can find the interpretation icon and the language selections that everyone will need to select. So you'll see three options. Please select your language preference at this time. Spanish, you will be placed in the Spanish interpretation room. And again, this needs to be completed by everyone. So please do that now. If anyone experiences connectivity issues with Zoom, you can call in for either English or Spanish. The phone numbers are provided to you now on this slide. On this next slide, they are posted on our website, and we have also shared that information in the chat. A few more logistical items before we start. Next slide, please. Today's presentation is posted on our website at bes.dtsc.ca.gov. This workshop is being recorded, and by your continued participation is acknowledgement that you are being recorded. And today we will be sharing the English presentation on the operating plan. As this is an evolving work, the Spanish version of this presentation will be available by end of day next Wednesday. And we invite you to continue to provide feedback on information shared in both English and Spanish following the workshop to be considered for the updated version of the operating plan. The chat function will be enabled. We ask that the chat function be reserved for submitting public comment related to the operating plan and not for side conversations. And I would like to remind everyone that we are recording today's session, and on a recorded Zoom, all chat becomes part of the recorded record. So please be mindful of that. And if you experience technical issues during the event, please send a direct Zoom message to Corinne, our Zoom host. Closed captions are enabled on Zoom, and you can move the caption display or turn it off altogether. We ask that you please stay muted throughout the meeting unless you are making a comment. And we also ask that you turn off your video cameras unless you are making a comment to ensure that there is enough internet bandwidth for everyone. To ensure proper translation, I will periodically check in with the Spanish line to see if there are any comments. And during that time, there will be a pause for translation. And next slide, please. And then the next slide. We are looking forward to hearing from the public throughout today's workshop and have scheduled times on the agenda to do so. There are several different ways in which you can participate. And if you wish to voice your comment, please raise your virtual hand on your Zoom toolbar or press *9 on your phone if you have called in to join us. If you have joined the Spanish channel by phone, please wait for the interpreters to provide instructions. If you would like to express your comment in writing, you may use the chat function or submit it to us via email at besinfo@bes.dtsc.ca.gov. And during this informal workshop, we would like to encourage full public participation and input on the BES operating plan. To that end, we will not implement the 3-minute time limit this afternoon. Taking into consideration that the comments are directly focused on the operating plan. And when it is your opportunity to comment, please speak at an even pace to ensure that all participants can hear you. This concludes today's logistics review. Thank you for your time, and I will now pass it over to Member Bhatia.
Thank you, Sheena, and thank you to the team that's helping host and facilitate this workshop. And thank you all for joining us today. I am looking forward to spending the next hour with you talking about the operating plan. As you heard earlier, this workshop is designed to solicit your input and answer any questions that you may have about the operating plan for the Board of Environmental Safety. I will set some context early on that talks about what is the purpose of the operating plan and how the operating plan has evolved so far. And then I will walk you through the most current version of the operating plan. I will pause at every section and ensure that we take any questions that come up pertaining to that section. So context setting, starting here. As some of you may have heard, the BES operating plan has been evolving and developing over the course of the last several months. We have extensively discussed sections of the operating plan at our previous board meetings. And what you're about to see is the version 3 of the operating plan. The board members have largely aligned on the fact that we would like this operating plan to be a living document, as this board is an inaugural board, and we are continuing to learn about the topics of concern from all of our constituents. We will expect to edit, update this document based on your input. The second thing to remember is that this plan is largely based on the SB 158 mandate and captures the vision as laid out by the governor, his administration, and the legislature. Where SB 158 has been somewhat ambiguous or not clear, the board has debated the intent of 158 and has made decisions about where we would like to, how we would like to interpret 158 and what activities we would like to undertake based on our understanding and interpretation of 158. I will call those areas out, and again, looking forward to receiving and hearing your input. Lastly, this document is intended to capture the scope of what we will do. This is what I call the what document. Through the course of the last few months, I've had many conversations with constituents asking specific details around activities and timelines. We are still working on those details, and we expect to follow up the operating plan with something we call the implementation plan that will capture the how we will expect to deliver on these deliverables and our scope. So a little bit before we jump into the operating plan, I'd like to share a little bit about the evolution of this particular document. Over the last few months, as I mentioned, we've had several conversations. I will give you some examples of conversations and meetings that we've had as a board based on which this operating plan has evolved. This is not intended to be completely comprehensive and cover every single piece of input, but it's to give you a sense of the kinds of public engagement we've had so far. We've received input from organizations and constituents that have shown up at our board meetings. We've received input through the public workshop we held 2 months ago. We've also held one-on-one conversations with a few community organizations that have expressed interest, namely CRPE. We've met with Earth Justice, folks from PSRLA, also from CDE. We've done presentations at organizations like SEEB and presented the operating plan to their membership. We've also spoken with Cal RMA, which is another association, again, introduced them to the operating plan and solicit input. So these are just some forums that we have received comments on. We've also received comments from DTSC, and we've evaluated all of those comments and made a decision on which ones we would like to incorporate. For more detail on all of this, all the comments we've received, we have a memo that we have logged all these conversations in, and we've specifically documented the channel of the feedback, what was communicated to us, and how we've treated that piece of input. There's a detailed memo that's posted on our website. Sheena, if you don't mind adding the URL in our chat window for easy access, that would be great. So if you want to geek out on the operating plan, we invite you to please read the memo to get fully up to speed on this. And we will also, we are also happy to meet one-on-one with organizations that want to continue to provide input. There are a few more constituents that have reached out to us at the last public workshop, and we're looking to schedule conversations with them before the end of the year. All right. So with that, I am going to move on. Actually, one other comment I'm going to make based building off of what Sheena said, which is you are largely going to see an English version of the operating plan. This is because we as a board met on the 12th of this month, which is Monday of this week. And we debated the many elements of the operating plan. So we've spent the last 2 days incorporating that input into an English version, and we weren't able to get the Spanish translation in time for this public workshop. So the Spanish translation is coming, and those of you that want to kind of review that and meet outside of this public workshop and provide input, again, we're very open to meeting with you all. But for the purpose of today, because of the very short turnaround time we had, we do not have a Spanish translated version, unfortunately. Okay, so the operating plan, what you're seeing in the next few slides is a PowerPoint version of the operating plan document. There are 3 different sections to the operating plan. Section 1 is our purpose. Section 2 is our approach. And then we will spend a bulk of time talking about our strategic objectives. There are 6 of them. So just to orient you to what is in the plan itself. So the purpose is language we've lifted from SB 158. You will see in this document that every time we referenced language or lifted language directly from the mandate, we have added code references. For those of you that are following the evolution of this document, you'll see that we've changed how we've footnoted the code reference to make the language a little bit clearer and easier for you to follow. But the references are all in the document. So our purpose is largely referenced in 158, and we've lifted from it. You can see that it's primarily to oversee the reform as envisioned by the legislator, the governor, and his administration. And we are representing the general public and acting to protect public health. As Sheena said, you can feel free to interrupt, raise your hand and ask questions. And Sheena and Jessica, our ombuds, are moderating the chat today. But I'm going to keep walking you through a few sections, and we'll pause and take your inputs. The next section is our approach. This is not referenced in the code. These are some guiding principles that we as a board came up with about how we would like to deliver on our outcomes and what are the core principles we wish to not just embody within ourselves as a board, but also ensure that we are continuing to work with DTSC to embody. So this is a culture of transparency. That's our number one guiding principle. I mentioned earlier that we have a memo that details all the pieces of input we've received on the operating plan. Every single aspect of public engagement we've written public memos and posted them on our website, so you can all follow our journey as a board. So our first guiding principle is what we call radical transparency. Second is to drive accountability. And this will be both through shaping DTSC's performance metrics and also trying to understand how those performance metrics are impacting the lived experience of our communities. And then third is rebuilding trust. We've heard from multiple community organizations that there has been a sort of history of erosion of trust, and we're looking to be yet another forum to help rebuild that trust. So these are our core guiding principles. Now moving on to really the section of the operating plan that has the details of our scope, or what I call the guardrails that the board will use to plan our deliverables. There are 6 strategic objectives. I'm reading off of the slide as you can see them. Objective 1 is fee structure. Objective 2, we have renamed this to call this accountability and partnership. Objective 3 is on environmental justice. Objective 4, public engagement. Objective 5, permitting. And objective 6 is on performance measurement and reporting. Sheena?
So at this time, the way that today's workshop is going is formatted is after each of those objectives that Sushma covers, she's going to pause and we will take public comment on that section she just went over. So at this time, we are open for public comment on any of the previous slides that member Bhatia just went over. So if you would like to voice your comment, please raise your virtual hand. I would like to check in with the Spanish interpreters to see if there are any comments from the Spanish room or the bridge line. And additionally, you can also press *9 on your phones if you called in, or you can also use the chat function to submit your comment that way. At this time, I'm not seeing any virtual hands raised.
Okay. Thank you, Sheena. Like we said, this is informal. It's intended to get you all engaged. So whenever you have a comment or question, please jump in, and we will also pause for you multiple times. Okay, I'm going to now walk you through each section of the operating plan, starting with the fee structure. So the main intent behind the strategic objective that's titled fee structure is to make sure that collectively between DTSC and the board, we have enough funding to deliver on the mission, to deliver on all of the roles and responsibilities laid out in our strategic plans, and deliver on the performance metrics that we have set for ourselves. They're also called KPIs. So with that intent in mind, there are 2 main areas we will spend our time. One is we have the authority to establish a fee structure by regulation for 3 categories of fees. These are the generation handling fee, the facility fee, and environmental fee. So that's number 1. Number 2 is we will also conduct an analysis of the fee structure. And the idea of the analysis is to make adjustments based on what funds are appropriated versus what is needed by the department and the board to carry out our duties. So that's the bullet number 2 that you're reading here. I've paraphrased it for you. And really the analysis, the duration of the analysis and is really up to the board's discretion and we will work with DTSC to figure out what is the right time frame to do the analysis. For this first year, as we're coming up to speed as a board, we expect to understand the whole appropriation cycle. And since the fee structure was just updated this past year, we will look to follow it through the course of 2023 and then formulate a perspective on this. But for the purpose of the operating plan, these are the 2 broad areas within our scope, which is to set the fee and to do the analysis to make sure we have adequate funding.
Okay, so we will now open up for public comment on the objective 1 for the fee structure. If you would like to voice your comment, please raise your virtual hands. Mr. Chuck White, I do acknowledge you. Let me check in first with the Spanish line to see if there are any comments on the Spanish line. And again, you can press *9 on your phones if you would like to raise your virtual hands if you've called in. And you can also use the chat function or email us at besinfo@bes.dtsc.ca.gov. Mr. Chuck White, you can go ahead, please unmute yourself, and you can also share your video if you like.
Great. Thank you very much. This is Chuck White with Manette, Phelps and Phillips. I'm really encouraged by the putting together this operating plan structure. Fees is a matter of something that has been near and dear to my heart for the past 30, 40 years in California, particularly with respect to how that might affect the movement of hazardous waste generated in California to other states. And I was wondering if you have any plans to look at the fee structure that you'd be contemplating for California and how that might compare with the fee structure of other states that would be within quote unquote striking distance of generators from California. So you might get a sense of what the differences, if any, in the fee structures might make with respect to the movement of hazardous waste. I haven't checked the total flow of hazardous waste in California in a while, but I seem to recall it's something like 50% of all the hazardous waste that was generated in California was exported to other states. And I noticed that in your previous slide, you had the statement, need for hazardous waste management in the state. And I was wondering how that relates to the need for hazardous waste management in other states and how the fees might affect the movement of hazardous waste from one state to another. And so my only comment would be to encourage you when you're talking about fees in California to make sure you do it against the backdrop of what fees are charged by other states that regulate the same kind of activities as does the DTSC in California, just so we can get kind of hopefully towards a level playing field with respect to ensuring that the fees are not a significant factor with respect to the movement of hazardous waste from California elsewhere or any other movements that might be significant. So I'd appreciate that if you could consider that as something you might look at in the development of your fee structure, is to make sure you're doing it against the backdrop of what the fees are in other states. Thank you very much. And even other countries too, to the extent that Mexico receives hazardous waste from California. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Are there other comments, Sheena, before we move on?
At this time, I am not seeing any additional hands raised, and I received confirmation that there are no comments on the Spanish line.
Thank you, Sheena. Chuck, again, thank you for your comment. I've recorded it. The content around the fee structure that's in the mandate is now in our operating plan. Additional input that we're getting through the course of this workshop is being logged. We will have a discussion at the board meeting and then decide if we want to expand the scope of what's in our mandate and in our operating plan. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to now move on to the next strategic objective, which is called accountability and partnership. Really, the intent is to drive more accountability, to make sure we are being accountable to all of our constituents, us as a board, and also driving a sense of accountability with DTSC's activities. And we are collaborating with our sister agencies on areas where we have a joint area of focus. So with that being the broad intent behind the strategic objective, there are a few activities that are laid out within this operating plan based on the mandate for us. The first one is to review and consider for approval the director. In this case, it's the director of DTSC's annual priorities. That's number one. And that allows us to help and shape the performance metrics for the overall department and evaluate for the overall department and the director's progress against those metrics. Second is to conduct an analysis of DTSC's programs. We also explicitly called out, based on how 158 is written, that we will evaluate how well DTSC is able to collaborate with other state agencies or sister agencies that have those joint areas of focus, as I called out, whether it's the Water Resources Board or the Regional Water Quality Control Board, Resources Recycling and Recovery Department, and so on. And the purpose here is to eliminate any sort of overlap or to work together to amplify the messaging and the impact we're having on communities. The third bullet here talks about how we as a board will liaise with the Department of Defense. This is explicitly called out within 158. As some of you may know, our board member, there's a board member, Alexis Strauss-Hacker, who is our liaison to the Department of Defense on all matters related to cleanup on federal facilities. And then lastly, within 158 or within our charter, we also have the responsibility of ensuring that we are making sure that the general fund monies that are appropriated for communities in vulnerable, the CBCI. I'm sorry, I think CBCI acronym is not spelled correctly here, but all the CBCI funds as described in 158 are being properly spent, which is a part of the accountability. So I'm going to pause here just to give you a sense of what's in accountability and partnership. As I started this section, I talked about how the primary purpose of this section is to make sure we are driving accountability within DTSC, and also as a board, we are being accountable to all of our constituents. And in that spirit, we will evaluate the director of DTSC, we will evaluate DTSC's programs, we will appoint our own liaison to the Department of Defense, and we will conduct an analysis of these general fund monies, but not all general fund monies. It's only those that are specifically carved out for CBCI.
Okay, so we will now open up public comment to go over Objective 2, accountability and partnership that Member Bhatia just went over. So if you'd like to comment on that section, please raise your virtual hands. I would also like to check in with the Spanish interpreters to see if there are any comments from the Spanish line or the Spanish interpretation room. I do see Ingrid Brostrom's virtual hand raised. Go ahead, you may unmute yourself and share your video if you like.
I just wanted to touch base on the performance metrics piece of this. I know we've talked about it a number of times, but I'm going to be a bit like a broken record on this. That while the DTSC director, of course, has input and information to share with the Board of Environmental Safety, this is really meant to be a public process with participation from the public, with stakeholders, and really allow the board discretion to decide what it ultimately decides to land on for the performance metrics. And so I know sometimes in reading that language quickly, it can look like the director is kind of giving the performance metrics to the board to adopt, but that is not the actual language when you look at it closer. And this is really a public process. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Chuck White, you may go ahead. You can unmute yourself and share your video if you like, and please state your name and affiliation.
Hello again, this is Chuck White. I'm with Manette, Phelps and Phillips. We're a legal and consulting firm, and we do a lot of work in the hazardous waste space. And we're very interested in seeing how this BES program develops and works out. And I just wanted to mention very quickly, I'm hoping that you do spend some time looking at the overlap between the DTSC and other agencies. Namely, the Water Board is the one that I hear about the most, and the Regional Water Quality Control Boards. And I've heard a number of stories from folks that we really hope they can become under the purview of the Regional Water Board rather than DTSC. I don't know all the facts in those situations, but I really hope that you can come up with some kind of system that would be recognized by all agencies as an appropriate means to split the responsibilities. I mean, the water board is responsible for water, the DTSC is responsible for hazardous waste. I can see that there's obviously overlap in some cases, but there's no other state that I'm aware of that has the complex regulatory structure that involves multiple agencies having to potentially nod in the same direction before a project proponent can get anything done. So it's just something, it's a very important issue, and I hope you don't give it short shrift. I'm sure you won't. But if you could just spend some time making sure you map out in some kind of diagram that would be helpful to show those areas based on past experience for which there is duplication and overlap, and really focus some attention on how those can be better managed in such a way as to, make it much more efficient to get a decision made. So I appreciate it. I know you're going to look at it, but I just want to highlight that this is a really important point that needs to be carefully evaluated. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Are there any other additional comments for Objective 2, accountability and partnership?
Gina, we have a commenter, Wendy McCarville, who is saying that there's no option to raise hands for this person. So I'm wondering if we can allow that person the option to speak.
Yes, of course. Wendy, would you like to go ahead and speak?
Hi, yeah. So I'm just trying to understand the liaison with the DoD. Have you initiated that? What is the criteria there?
Thank you.
Anybody?
Did you have more to your question or comment, Wendy?
No. Could you put that slide up in English again? Is it 16? Yeah. Yeah. So what's the process here?
Okay. So if you can just hold for one moment, Wendy, I just want to make sure I've recapped the comments received so far, and then I'll come back to your question. So
Sure.
far, for this particular section, there were 3 sets of comments. One was Ingrid's comment about performance metrics, making sure we understand the intent of perhaps 158, that the director, that we as the board get to influence the performance metrics of the director. The second comment was from Chuck about creating some operating model of how the state agencies work together on common areas of overlap or duplication. And then your comment or question was about the liaison responsibilities. We, as a board, have appointed a liaison, and that is board member Strauss Hacker, to liaise with the Department of Defense. I think I encourage you to connect with her to understand more of what that relationship has looked like so far. It's intended to be an open channel of communication so that the board can keep the DoD informed about our charter and areas we are working on, and then it's to also make sure that the Department of Defense can keep us up to speed on areas related to permitting and cleanup of federal facilities that fall under DTSC's jurisdiction.
So you have already you have appointed a liaison.
Yes.
Could you give me that name, please?
It's member Strauss Hacker. You can find her information on our website, but perhaps Sheena, you can add a link to the chat window.
Okay, I'm hearing Charles. Is it a woman or a man?
Hi, Wendy. I'll go ahead and send you a message in the chat that gives you that information.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, this.
Thank you, Wendy. Did you have any additional questions or comments, Wendy?
I guess not, because I'm having a hard time getting a straight answer here. So I guess move on.
It's member Strauss Hacker. You aren't able to hear me clearly, but it's member Strauss Hacker. And Jessica, our ombuds, is going to put information on our on the chat window. You also have this recording, so you can also come back to this and get the information of the liaison.
Thanks.
Thank you, Member Bhatia. Also, Wendy had mentioned trouble with not able to raise her virtual hand. If anyone is experiencing issues to raise their virtual hand, please feel free to let us know in the chat so that we can assist and help you on how to do that.
And Wendy, just to be really clear, the liaison role is played by a board member. It's a board member, Alexis Strauss-Hacker.
Okay. Are there any additional comments for Objective 2, accountability and partnership? Seeing none, Member Bhatia, for this section.
Great, thank you. I think one clarification earlier on my earlier slide, there's a typo in the slide. Apologies for the typo. CVCI is Clean Up in Vulnerable Communities Initiative, not Communities and Communities Initiative. Apologies. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next strategic objective, which is environmental justice. For those of you that have read 158, know that environmental justice is referenced multiple times in 158. But in terms of the scope of what the board will do, it is less prescriptive. What it does say is the language you see on the slide, which is it says that we will set up an advisory subcommittee to seek input and feedback from environmental justice communities, and then have that advisory subcommittee provide input and recommendations to the full board. For those of you that are tracking the board activities, know that we now do have a subcommittee on environmental justice that has board member Georgette Gomez and board member Lizette Ruiz. So that's really the first activity under environmental justice. In addition, we've added two other activities under this strategic objective. These are our interpretation, and based on our interpretation and our interest of the environmental justice subcommittee. So which is why in the operating plan, you will see these italicized. We want to make really clear to all the constituents and members of the public that language that we lifted directly from 158 is referenced in code, and language that we have interpreted or added is italicized, so you can easily see where we've interpreted or expanded the scope of our delivery. Okay, so in the section, we've added that we will support DTSC in the development of the EJAC, which those of you that are following this know that it's a forum that represents communities across California. We have also added that we want to collaborate with our sister agencies and amplify environmental justice efforts that are already underway across California. I think one other call out worth making is, since our last version of the operating plan and our last board discussion, we've also expanded the language to include not just impacted communities or environmental justice communities, but also to include tribal governments and tribal communities. So with that, I'm going to hand it over again to Sheena.
Thank you. So at this time, we will open up for public comment in regards to Objective 3, environmental justice. So if you have any comments or suggestions for this portion that Member Bhatia just covered, please raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phones. To find your virtual hands, I believe on your Zoom toolbar, it's under reactions. If you click on the reactions icon, you'll see the raise hand feature there. And again, if you're having issues, you can always send us a chat and we will have someone assist you. So at this time, please let me know if there are any. I do see a hand raised. I would like to check in with the Spanish line. Please inform me if you have any commenters on the Spanish line as well. And while they're doing that, I will go ahead and call on the main room participants. Melissa, please go ahead. You can unmute yourself and share your video, and please state your name and affiliation.
Hi, I'm Melissa Bumstead with Parents Against the Santa Susana Field Lab in Los Angeles. I would like to see one thing that we're struggling to understand is the hierarchy within the DTSC, within the BES, and even California EPA. And now that there might be a new environmental justice board, I think a flow chart would be really helpful for people in the community to understand where this new advisory group, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact acronyms that was just in front of us. Thank you. The EJAC, to see where they're going to fit in. And also, I think we'd love to see what they will actually be doing instead of just supporting the development of the Justice Advisory Committee. What will the role of that committee be? I feel like there are a lot of committees and boards and regulatory agencies and these things. I'm confused on how they fit together, and I'm confused with the hierarchy within them, and that if we can't find the answers with one group, which is the next, step up the line through the management, so to speak. I think that would be really helpful if that could be included with the final version of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any? I do see another hand. Jenny Knack, go ahead. You may unmute yourself and share your video, and please state your name and affiliation.
Hi, my name is Jenny Knack. I'm also with Parents Against the Santa Susana Field Lab. I would like to see in this environmental justice section stronger language, not limited to just engagement, but actually implementation and accountability back to the communities that the board is engaging with. I know that the board is new, but this doesn't seem to give very, strong goals in that area. And what I've just experienced so far is, yes, people we're being given listening sessions and we're being heard, but the answers so far have been no to our asks and requests across the board. And so I would like for this section to be revised and strengthened to actually give the communities the reform of DTSC and real active influential accountability and oversight, because that is what the communities want. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional comments or input for Objective 3, environmental justice? Seeing none, Member Bhatia.
Thank you, Sheena. So quickly recapping the two things I heard. One is from Melissa about providing an org chart or some model that allows communities to understand which are all the organizations working on environmental justice issues and how do they fit in with each other. And then expanding on like the EJAC's role specifically. The second thing I heard is from Jenny, also from SSFL, about just the need for stronger language that can drive influence and accountability, specifically as it relates to environmental justice. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is our public engagement section. We spoke about our guiding principle being radical transparency. So the public engagement section really expands on how we expect to drive transparency. Like in the earlier sections, there is language here that's lifted straight from 158, and there's some language that we've added based on our interpretation and interest, and of course, the input we've received so far. So with that being said, the first, I'm just going to paraphrase the first few activities that you're reading on your screen. The first activity relates to our ombudsperson. We have Jessica on the line today. The purpose of having this ombuds role is to make sure we have an additional channel for the public to provide complaints and suggestions. Jessica will evaluate the complaints and provide reports of those findings and recommendations to the broader full board, but also help triage them with our DTSC colleagues. So that's number one. Second is to solicit input specifically as it relates to the state's hazardous waste management plan. Those of you that are tracking know that board member Lizette Ruiz and I are on the subcommittee that's working with DTSC to track the development of the hazardous waste management plan. So those are the first two activities. And paraphrasing the next two activities that you are reading on the slide, we will adopt procedures to hear and decide on the permit appeals process, permit appeals as they relate to hazardous waste facility permits. And we've held a few workshops. Board member Alexis Strauss-Hacker and board member Lizette Ruiz are both driving the public input as it relates to the permit appeals process. And we are in the process of actively debating and considering what the procedures will be. So that's activity number 3. The fourth one is for us to think through the framework for conducting public hearings on individual permitted sites or remediated sites. This is also called like site-specific hearings or considerations. And then lastly, also in public engagement, you can see this language is italicized. It's because we have added this based on our interpretation and input received so far. We ultimately want to make sure the outreach we are conducting is effective and appropriate. And that might include making sure we have enough communication channels to identify problem areas, designing effective outreach materials. You've seen us come into the communities and hold our board meetings there. That's just one venue. But this activity is broadly intended to make our outreach and engagement more effective and also influence DTSC and work with them to identify best practices so they can develop their own public outreach that's more effective.
Okay, thank you, Member Bhatia. So we'll open up this portion now for public comment on Objective 4, public engagement. So if anyone would like to comment or share input on this section that Member Bhatia just covered, please raise your virtual hands and or press *9 on your phones. At this time, I would also like to check in with the Spanish line to let me know if there are any comments in Spanish. And I do see Chuck White's hand raised. Please go ahead, unmute yourself and share your video if you like, and please restate your name and affiliation.
Sure. Again, this is Chuck White with Manette, Phelps and Phillips. And I really think that this whole area of public engagement is really important. And I'm not sure I can really articulate it very clearly, but I'm going to try. Is that over the past many years, you have the project proponent working with the DTSC to develop what appears to be an appropriate permit, for example. And then that's laid out kind of at the end of the line with the public. And there's usually a considerable amount, not always, but usually a considerable amount of objection because they don't know how the department and the proponent got to this place. And and I don't know how to do it. I don't have a good suggestion, but I would hope you spend some time looking at how you can engage the public, from the beginning. And try to make sure that they're fully understand the need and the purpose for the facility and the services it provides, and try to look at ways that you can reach a common ground between the project proponent and the community. And you can't put that off to the very end of the process. You've got to have an engagement between the DTSC staff, the community, and the project proponent, almost from the very beginning. And so people can feel they have a voice in it, so they can have an understanding of why this project is beneficial, hopefully, to the people of the state of California. And what can be done to make sure, if there is some concerns on the part of the community, that number one, they're well understood, and is there something that can be done to help address those concerns, but not waiting till the very end. It's got to be done at the very beginning to work the process forward. And I really hope you spend some time thinking about it and talking to people that have been in the field on these kinds of issues, because I think it's really important. You can't really always get to consensus on a project, but if you can get to consent, that is, enough is being offered to make a meaningful difference, and it still allows the project to go forward to provide services to the people of the state of California. And by the people of the state of California, I mean, there isn't a single person in California, I don't think, I certainly haven't met them, that doesn't participate in the generation of hazardous waste. It's part of everything we do. And so we have to make sure that we have a way to manage hazardous waste, but we have to do it in such a way that's respectful to the needs of the communities. And I'm hoping that the BES is not just another step removed until the very end, but can develop a process and a program, perhaps within the DTSC, perhaps in partnership between BES and DTSC, to really have this public engagement start early in the process so we all know what the issues are that have to be addressed. And hopefully we can get to consensus, but I suspect most cases will get to consent. What would be the thing that would allow the project to be a minimal impact on a community and surrounding area, but still allow it to meet the needs of the state? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Jerry Dietrich, go ahead. You may unmute yourself and share your video if you like, and please state your name and affiliation.
Hi, I'm Jerry Dietrich. I am commenting as a citizen of California, but also I do work for DTSC for transparency's sake. I had a question about the public engagement portion, that first bulleted item about the ombudsperson receiving complaints and suggestions from the public. All of that is a lot. I'm not sure if the board plans on that one person doing all that work, or is that some area where you plan on expanding in order to provide the appropriate support for the communities to submit their complaints and suggestions? I know that even with a 3 or 4 man team, it can be a lot of work.
Okay.
That was
Jerry.
it. Sorry, that's all.
Thank you, Jerry.
Jenny Knack, you may go ahead. Please unmute yourself and share your video if you like, and please state your name and Jenny Knack, did you wish to comment?
Yes, sorry, I was speaking without unmuting. Jenny Knack, Parents Against SSFL. I also had concerns that one ombudsperson would not be sufficient to handle the complaints and concerns of all the stakeholders across the state. My second issue is I am concerned that those complaints and statements are just going to be filed away as opposed to proactively addressed. I think that this is the right section to state this. So if it's not, I apologize. During the last hearing, there was a discussion of the permit appeals process and how stakeholders would engage in that. And there was a suggestion by the board that DTSC scientific analysis would not be opened up and scrutinized during a permit appeal process. And for those of us who are not orphan sites, who have responsible parties, sometimes extremely powerful ones like Boeing, DOE, NASA, the reason why I am attending this hearing is because I am concerned of the captured nature of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And what we want for public engagement is for independent scientists and independent analysis of what we are calling DTSC science to be looked at and considered by the board, because what is being proposed as DTSC science is often actually science by the responsible party or the polluter, and to take off the table the ability to look into the numbers or or look into the effect that decisions are having, scientific decisions, I think is extremely problematic. So I was concerned about this across the board idea of, DTSC scientific analysis will not be within the purview of BES. For many of us at sites where we do have very formidable responsible parties, that is problematic. And we would like, these site assessments to be for BES to be willing to go through the fine print of agreements made on behalf of DTSC, sometimes in favor of the polluters and responsible parties, because we're the ones being affected. So we would like that to be a part of the public engagement process. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional comments for objective 4 public engagement? And I see Chuck White, you have your hand raised. Go ahead. Please restate your name and affiliation for the record.
Sure. This is Chuck White again with Manette Phelps and Phillips. I remembered something I wanted to raise in my previous comment. Is that I think the board has a lot on their plate, and you're going to be overwhelmed real quickly. For example, if you try to wait until the very end of DTSC making for example, a permit decision and then weigh into it at the very end. And there's a lot of folks that we've heard are hoping for a de novo review by the board, which basically, as I understand it, would mean you throw out everything that the DTSC has done and you start all over again to review the facts behind the case, the reason for the permit, the need for the permit, the conditions of the permit, and so on and so forth. And I'm really worried that, I'm not supporting de novo review. I'm just hoping that in your role as an oversight board, you can somehow encourage these discussions to take place early and often, so you don't have to be forced or urged to do a complete de novo review of a permit action once it comes up to the board for consideration, once the department's made a decision. And I wish I could tell you how I've mapped this out and I had exactly a detailed description of how to do this, but I don't. But I think it's really going to be important that you spend some time figuring out how you can participate appropriately and not wait to the very end. And hopefully the concerns that you'll ultimately be faced with as a review board will have been addressed to some degree during the process. And it doesn't require a de novo review, because if we get a de novo review on every single permit that comes up on appeal, you're going to have your board the size of the department. And I don't think that makes any sense. And I hopefully no one else does either. So I would encourage you to try to, again, as I said before, is to do it early and often and try to make sure that the issues are getting addressed. Or if they're not getting addressed, there's a clear explanation of why they can't be or shouldn't be addressed in this particular permitting process. So again, sorry to take up so much of your time. You're doing a great job, and I appreciate your attention to the concerns I raised.
Thank you for that. Florence Caribbean, go ahead. You may unmute yourself and share your video if you like, and please state your name and affiliation.
My name is Florence Caribbean, and I'm the chair of the Del Amo Action Committee. I wanted to comment on several things, and I'll try to do that in a summarized way here. You mentioned that the director of the department would be setting annual priorities and sharing those priorities with the board. I think it's very important that there be an opportunity for public comment on those priorities, so that people that feel there should be a different priority have an opportunity to comment on that. And the other thing I think is really important on that is that the staff of DTSC also have an opportunity to know what those priorities are in the effort to guide the work that they do. I think that's just so important. Chuck White's comments about building a process where the community is brought in earlier on the permit process. That is something that has been commented on over the years. It's not something that just came up. And I think it's time to find a way to do that the right way and to involve the public so that they don't feel they're left out of the process until the final permit, the draft permit is issued or whatever. It would take some thought and effort to do that, but I think it's really worth it. And the other thing that I would comment on is how vital it is that the government agencies work together. I'm currently working on a task force that includes EPA, the Air Board, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, in some degree DTSC, and having that kind of dialogue really makes a difference. And having that kind of dialogue with the community that's concerned really helps a lot. So I encourage work on that. There also has been for years an issue about decisions about, does the water board do this project or does DTSC? And that has gone around and around in circles for a long time. People have talked about having an MOU to kind of sort that out. But it would be great to get some clarity on that issue. So I'm also a little bit confused about this environmental justice subgroup. Will it include representatives of environmental organizations? Will they be part of that subgroup? Or how does that work? And in LA, we've got a lot going on. We have a new committee that's been formed by the supervisors that gave a presentation in our meeting this week. And that too is something where you can have a lot on your plate in regard to things like this if they're not clearly defined and without any. You really need the people that do this work to understand what else is going on out there, because currently there's a lot going on, and we have community groups that don't want to be not part of that process, but it really has to be constructed in such a way where they have the time and a realistic way of communicating so they don't feel overwhelmed. So thank you very much for listening to my kind of broad comments across the scope. And I hope they were helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Florence. Are there any additional comments in regards to Objective 4, public engagement? I'm seeing none, Member Bhatia.
Thank you, Sheena. That was a lot of comments and a lot of interesting discourse. I'm going to make an attempt to quickly recap the themes that I've heard for my own benefit and for the benefit of everyone on this call. The first comment was from Chuck about early and often engagement of all the constituents, whether it's the permitting facility, DTSC, and the public in the permitting process. That's number one. The second comment was from Jerry about the ombuds capacity, maybe not having enough. The third one was from Jenny, SSFL, talking about the ombuds capacity. I think you're both scaring Jessica away. Jessica is our first and only ombuds person. So Jessica, please use your earmuffs. we need you. But the next comment also was from Jenny about permit appeals process as an example, but using independent analysis, as in science that's not generated exclusively by the business community in making decisions. The next comment was from Chuck about, again, capacity of the board, given the scope, and also serving our oversight function, which is engaging early in the discussions, engaging all the community members early in our discussions with a clear explanation on, as to what we're addressing and why. The next comment was from Florence, a series of comments about providing an opportunity for the public to comment on the director's priorities, making sure that DTSC staff are also aware and have transparency on the director's priorities, and also making sure on that as we bring government agencies together, create a way for them to be impactful and effective. And then an important question about EJAC, what's the makeup of the EJAC, whether we will have the right set of communities engaging on the EJAC. This is something that we will pass on to the Environmental Justice Subcommittee, which is Member Gomez and Member Ruiz, since they're working directly with DTSC on establishing the EJAC. So thank you all for the comments so far. And are any more questions or comments? We can move on to the next section.
No, I think we're good to go on to the next section.
All right. Okay, our next section is permitting. As the title says, really the intent here is to mitigate or reduce the impacts of hazardous substances and waste on public health, and also do this in a way that drives efficiency and execution velocity on the part of DTSC. So with that spirit in mind, we expect to work with the DTSC's leadership team to find efficiencies in the permitting process. We know that DTSC is already conducting many Lean Six Sigma type studies to find their own efficiencies. We as a board will expect to serve as another set of eyes to help influence the process and drive further efficiencies where possible. Moving on, we also will schedule, if in situations where a permit decision is overdue and so on, we can schedule hearings or use our board forums to influence how the department will tackle them and ensure timeliness. And then the third piece is around analyzing and driving decisions on permit appeals. We talked earlier about how Member Strauss-Hacker and Member Ruiz have been holding public workshops, to solicit input on the permit appeals process itself and how we as a board will expect to make these permit appeal decisions. So this is our scope of permitting. I want to call out that the idea is not to stand up a parallel department and run through all of permits just the way DTSC does it, but it's to serve as an oversight authority to influence and shape efficiencies where possible on the core permitting process, and then to drive decisions on permit appeals.
Okay, so we will now open up for public comment in response to Objective 5, permitting, the section that Member Bhatia just went over. So if you have any comment, input, or suggestions, please raise your virtual hand. If you have called in, please use *9 to raise your virtual hand. And I would like to check in with the Spanish interpreters to see if there are any comments from the Spanish interpretation room or bridge line. So at this time, please raise your virtual hands if you would like to comment. Again, you can always use the chat function or email us at besinfo@bes.dtsc.ca.gov. Currently, Member Bhatia, I do not see any virtual hands raised.
Okay. So we now move on to the very last strategic objective, last but also really critical, which is the performance metrics and reporting. The goal here is to identify the metrics that matter most to all the constituents and use those to evaluate and influence DTSC's performance metrics, their KPIs for each of their programs. And then we will transmit our own perspective on how well DTSC is doing against those objectives to the Secretary of the of EPA. And those are the key activities under the performance metrics and reporting objective.
Okay, so if anyone would like to voice their comments in response to Objective 6, please go ahead and raise your virtual hands. And this is the last objective that Member Bhatia will be covering as part of this objective plan presentation. Melissa, go ahead. You may unmute yourself and share your video if you like. And please restate your name and affiliation.
Melissa Bumstead with Parents Against the Santa Susana Field Lab. I don't have an answer. This is more of a question. I believe that a lot of the assumed problems within the DTSC are surface level. Things like, in a regular business or agency, they would be looking for objectives like were timelines met, were budgets met, was staff time used effectively. Even did they meet with EJ groups? I think it's going to have to go further than that and deeper than that. And I'm not sure how at the moment off the top of my head. Meeting with EJ groups as a check mark still might not meet the objectives of the EJ groups who are tired of meetings saying the same thing over and over and still nothing changes. And how does the BES measure that from what the community says, because the DTSC is a service to protect human health and the actual people living in the environments and in those frontline communities. How does the BES put that into the metric of this is what the community's goals were for this group, not just a budget, but that they're not just having more meetings that are difficult for EJ communities and frontline communities to take the time to do, but how are the objectives of the community met? I feel like that would be an incredibly powerful tool to have with the DTSC. For example, if there were metrics used for how effectively the community thought that communication went, what changes were, that the community prioritized, how were those objectives met within a community's idea, and the community's idea for a timeline isn't always going to be accurate. But if we're looking at, for example, in the case of Kettleman City, where they've been operating on a expired permit for 9 years, and they thought that is unreasonable, I feel like that needs to be into the metric system. So I would be very curious to see how the BES is able to do that. I think it could actually solve a lot of problems, especially if that was a tool that shaped promotions and salaries and tools that could actually change employees' interest for working for polluters, because we, of course, see a lot of revolving doors. For example, the Boeing company hires people out of the DTSC fairly regularly, and vice versa. And that lobbying cycle, which is very profitable for a lot of these polluters. If there was an objective that the BES could put in that would help employees prioritize the community instead of the polluters, again, that could solve a lot of problems. I think that could be a very, very powerful tool. I just want to make sure that it's not just based off the surface of what a regular agency or a regular company might do, but to go much deeper to the level of how is that actually meeting the needs of impacted communities. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Chuck White, go ahead. You may unmute yourself and share your video, and please restate your name and affiliation.
Thank you once again. This is Chuck White with Manette, Phelps and Phillips. And I've worked in private industry long enough to know that one of the key things, one of the key mantras is that you can't manage it if you can't measure it. And that's sort of a simple way of stating a very complicated process. It recalls when I worked for the department many years ago, I was charged with having to come up with a metric for determining how effective the field inspectors were of DTSC and what would be the performance measurement. And of course, when you do an inspection, there's all kinds of moving parts to do an inspection. You've got to review the file. You've got to talk to other people that may be familiar with the facility. There's a lot of things that go into that. And so, how do you include those in the performance metric? Well, I came up with a brilliant idea. At least I thought I did at the time. Is just require a inspection report on a facility be done once every 5 days. That is, every 5 days of working, you have to produce an inspection report. Well, when that got to the director at the time, and I won't mention names, he basically blew up and said, "You mean you have to take 5 days to write a 3-page report?" And of course, the answer is, well, yeah. I mean, he said, I can report right back in an hour on my typewriter. So what are you talking about 5 days to report it? Well, there's a lot more in that than just simply the writing the report. It's just, what does that report represent in terms of the efforts that go into it? So where do you strike that balance between to measure every single moving part that leads to, in that case, an inspection report, versus a reasonable metric that reflects the efforts of the department staff to produce, whether it's an inspection report or a permit or whatever? That's a complicated fact, and I think it's complicated. It's really been difficult for the department to come up with a metric that makes sense, that isn't too simple or too complicated. Good luck.
Thank you for that. Jenny Knack, go ahead. You may unmute yourself and share your video if you like, and please restate your name and affiliation.
Jenny Knack, Parents Against SSFL. I'm going to piggyback just really quickly on Melissa's comment. When we've gotten to do some site toxic tours with BES and DTSC, and that's been really fantastic for our own education as groups. But one of the things we were asked to do is list our asks as groups. And I would like to propose that as a performance metric, we add a look back onto those asks. Were any of those asks met? Are the needs of the communities being actually met by the regulatory agency? Because thus far, none of our asks have been met. So we're talking, we're engaging, we're taking time away from our families to do the meetings, to do the tours. But I hate to say it, it feels like our asks are not being taken seriously. In fact, in the public comment section, taking into account the public's comments were qualified in the words "as necessary," "as deemed appropriate." And what we want to see in the reform of the agency is that the needs on the ground are being met. And I don't think that we can really evaluate the performance of the agency or the oversight board, for that matter, without looking at, are the asks of the communities across the state being met? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional comments in response to Objective 6, Performance Metrics and Reporting? And Florence Caribbean, go ahead. You may unmute yourself and share your video, and please restate your name and affiliation.
My name is Florence Caribbean, and I'm the chair of the Del Amo Action Committee. And I just want to support the comment that was made by the previous speaker, and to say that you can have a meeting with people and not hear what they said. And I really think that ask process is important, because it's important that the question, what do you need for us to do, is asked, and there's a door open for people to really answer that question and people that are interested enough to ask it. And then there's a process where you have the community feeling that the people they talked with really cared and are working on those things that are really important to the community. And that may sound like something, well, that'll be easy to do. That isn't easy to do at all, because you want people who are really caring people to be involved in that process. And in this task force I've worked on, we had some asks that, well, the steps we wanted to have taken were taken, which you can't imagine how much that means to us. And we didn't always get back what we thought would be the happy answer, but we did get people responding to us and telling us why they couldn't do exactly what we wanted them to do. And that process of dialogue that involves respect, that it involves caring, is a proactive and ongoing process that takes a lot of effort and time. And that's what people want. People to pay attention to what they're living with and care enough to do something about it. So I really can't tell you how important that is. Some people are better at it than others, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ivana, go ahead. You may unmute yourself and share your video if you like. Please state your name and affiliation.
Hi, this is Ivana Castellanos with Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles. I just wanted to comment on this performance metrics piece. And as we've heard today, there is a lot of confusion over, what the purview of some DTSC programs are, the different departments. And so I would just urge the BES, as it considers what the public engagement process is to identify these metrics, that it consider also doing some education and capacity building around what the department does in order to help the public develop stronger metrics. And so that's just something that I would encourage you all to do. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That also got a heart reaction from one of our participants as well. So are there any additional comments in response to Objective 6, performance metrics and reporting? No? Member Bhatia, I don't see any additional hands raised for Objective 6.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheena. As I'm doing a quick recap here, I just want to say thank you, like really heartfelt thank you for all of the comments that came in on this section, because I want to say every single one of them was very meaningful and truly informative for me personally. I'm one of the members of the subcommittee on performance metrics, along with board member Georgette Gomez. So this is an area we're looking to onboard on with DTSC starting in January to really understand what is the process of coming up with KPIs and how are they doing their own self-assessment and so on. So with all of the commentary I've heard so far, I'm going to have a lot more context as I go into these onboarding conversations with DTSC. So thank you. Really quickly, just recapping what I heard, Melissa, I think your comment was about outputs versus outcomes. It's a really good one. It's something that many government agencies grapple with, because outputs are easy to measure, but how do you measure the outcome of the lived experience of the communities? Which is why we started the whole context for this strategic objective anchored in that, which is what do the communities really desire, and how do we try to get to the essence of the outcomes and not just report on the number of meetings and outputs and so on. So good point, thank you. The second comment came from Chuck. I think just acknowledging that measurement in itself can take a lot of time. So how do we periodically do this? So thank you for that. Jenny, I think Jenny had two different pieces of input. One was doing some sort of a look back and using that as a way to evaluate the department and perhaps the director. And also something around follow through. It seems like some comments, there's always a caveat about taking the input from the constituents and considering them as necessary. So just, I'll let that stand, but something for us to think through how do we follow through as a board and how do we ensure DTSC follows through and what is the process of making decisions. Comment from Florence. I think the essence of what Florence was saying was around creating open dialogue, because open dialogue is what creates respect. That's how the communities feel respected, not simply creating public forums like this one where we continue to ask you to share your concerns and then don't respond back in a meaningful, impactful way. So it's a really important one for us to think about as a board. So thank you for that. And then Ivana from PSRL, I think the really good point about the confusion that exists about what the DTSC's KPIs are and how do we, using this board and our own experience of coming up to speed on KPIs as a way to also educate the public on how these KPIs are constructed, and that, of course, builds more trust with the community. So those are things I've heard. These are really, really important. I expect to work with my colleague, board member Gomez, to do more workshops that are specifically around the performance metrics piece, because we are thinking through implementation. So how are we going to go implement these objectives in the operating plan? So stay tuned. There'll be more forums for us to talk specifically about this.
Thank you, Member Bhatia. So at this time, I think we'll go ahead and open up for any last minute reflections in response to the operating plan presentation. If any comments or suggestions slipped your mind, now will be the time to share them. Florence Caribbean, go ahead. Please restate your name and affiliation.
My name is Florence Caribbean, and I'm the chair of the Del Amo Action Committee, and I am a former DTSC employee that worked there possibly longer than a lot of other people, because I started working there in 1981. I just mentioned that. But one of the things that I think is really important is for the board to really understand what it takes to do the work. What does it take to do an inspection? How does that work get done? If you have violations, what do you have to do to write them up or whatever? Because as a person that worked in enforcement for quite a while, I don't want to offend Chuck, but there's no such thing as a 3-page inspection report. It's more like a binder. And the job is very arduous, very difficult. And I think that's true. It's true in permitting. It's true in cleanup. I think it'd be really good for you to feel that you really understand what the people in those programs have to do their job. Because that's going to help you, like a performance objective of an inspection report in 3 days. Nobody's going to even take that seriously. And again, I'm not trying to offend Chuck, but if you know what the work amounts to and you hear from people that are doing it, then that performance matrix that is developed from that process will be much more meaningful. So that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Jenny Knack, you may go ahead. Please restate your name and affiliation as well.
Jenny Knack, Parents Against SSFL. One thing that I'm not seeing here, and I don't know if it even belongs here, but it's something that we haven't discussed that just came to my mind, so I'm just going to put it in the public record, is the need for the oversight board is, from a stakeholder community perspective, the need for a real look at corruption within an agency. And I know that relationships are being built between the board and the agency, and that is something that, you know, can't be controlled by a stakeholder. But I'm wondering if there's some kind of metric that can be put in and somehow quantified that would look for conflicts of interest, whether intentional or just as a matter of business. I mean, we are all cooperating with each other, right? But what we're dealing with, what this agency is doing, what DTSC is doing, is dealing with responsible parties that, you know, want to get the job done probably for as little as money as possible. And then there's people on the ground, stakeholders like myself, that want, you know, full and proper cleanups. And I'm wondering if the board can create something where they are on the lookout for conflicts of interest, i.e., corruption with the agency, not to vilify employees, but to actually work towards systematic change that we need to have true reform of the agency. The board has been created to reform the agency. So let's, without judging it, look and see where those conflicts of interest lie and somehow quantify it and put it into the metrics and evaluate it. I don't know if that's possible, if that's been done, but, you know, California is seen as this great progressive state. Let's be revolutionary. Let's do this together and hold ourselves accountable, like from all sides, and make the board effective, because the change is needed and there is corruption within the agency. Anyone who would state otherwise isn't looking, they don't really have their eyes open. So let's look for it and figure out how to change that and put it into these operating procedures. That's my big plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any additional last minute comments or suggestions in response to the operating plan presentation this evening? I'm not seeing any additional comments. I know that you received plenty comments this evening, Member Bhatia.
Thank you all. I just want to quickly recap and then mildly react to the two comments. I think, Florence, your comment about is a really good one, because you're talking about understanding the work that DTSC does. It's easy to sit at a distance and critique someone's work when you don't really understand how it's done. So that's good encouragement for us to take the time to maybe understand what the work is. There were a few members of DTSC that reached out to the board to provide input. I think it's an open call. If staff within DTSC have inputs on what can be done to improve their own workflows and create change within the department that are aligned with transparency, accountability, and trust, please reach out to us. We're all very accessible as a board, and the board information is on here. The email address is on here. So either one-on-one or come to a board meeting, so on, we can figure out a way. So thank you for that. And then the second comment, Jenny, it's about conflicts of interest. No reaction to provide. Certainly, we'll pass this on to our other board members and the board attorneys to see if there's something here that we can or should do. So thank you. I think honorable closure, lots of gratitude. It's December, we're coming up on holidays, and you've all taken the time in a whole hour, 2 hours of your time almost to provide input. We understand that it takes so much commitment to keep showing up to these board meetings and keep articulating things that you'd like to see, even though you've done this for many years or months and have not seen meaningful change. So really appreciate that you're doing this again and sort of sharing your concerns with us. We will, just to give you a sense of what will happen next, because we're trying to be transparent, what would happen next is I will write a memo summarizing some of these comments and submit it to our board chair for review by the broader board. And then we will discuss and make a decision on how we start to address these comments that have come in. But also this recording will be available on our website. We will share it with other board members for them to be thinking about incorporating in the implementation plans that they're each building.
Hi, Member Bhatia. Really quickly, we had a question in the chat that was asking about the slide deck being shared, and I believe I heard in the beginning of the meeting that it would be uploaded on Wednesday after being translated. Is that correct?
Yes, Sheena, I believe can this deck in the English version go on the website sooner than the Spanish version? Yes, so she's nodding. We will have the English version up on the website sooner, and then the Spanish version will come next week, which I believe I heard her say by Wednesday we'll have a translated version. So by Thursday we will expect to have the operating plan translated into Spanish on our website.
That's correct.
All right. So any other closing comments, thoughts? If not, thank you so much. I don't expect to engage with you. We don't have another public meeting coming up or a workshop coming up the rest of the year. So have a safe, healthy, restful holiday season. And please come back to our board meetings. We have one coming up in January. We'll have more workshops. So please stay engaged with us. And thank you so much for the encouragement and all the ideas. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.